Welcome to the World United. Welcome to the World United.
I want to, first of all, before we start up the panel discussion, I want to thank the four of you because it's been extremely interesting to see how people are approaching management from a much broader perspective than the traditional, Harvard Business School kind of thing. And I listen, I went that way, so I understand. But to bring storytelling in is so powerful. To talk about empathy is incredibly powerful. Real, your colors. I was almost laughing to myself after your talk because Gatik was using your colors in order to make the points that he was making in his speech. So it's amazing how all this blends together. But now that we've had a chance to kind of meet each other, understand each other, where do you think this is all going? I mean, multinationals are big, but at the same time, I think people crave that personal touch. So who'd like to talk and start off the story here? Anybody?
Oh, yeah, I'll start, Mike. Oh, by the way, what form did you do for your black belt?
Kyokushin Kai.
Oh, right, Kyokushin. Yeah. Yes, that and Shotokan are probably the two most popular forms of karate. Everything comes back, as you know, everything comes back to the individual. And the strength of an organization is determined by the inner strength of the individuals within that organization. So it all comes back to the person.
I can remember one of the positions I had. I was had a relatively senior position in a company, and we had a new general manager who came in, and he always impressed me because before he ever made a decision, he listened to everybody else talk and listened to everybody else's story. And it seems to me somehow, Dom, when you were talking about empathy and connecting, that's the kind of thing you were talking about. Dom, are you here? You're on mute, Dom.
Yeah, sorry, Mike. I can't hear you very well.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Try again.
I was just saying, I know how you were, a large portion of what you were talking about emphasized empathy and connecting with people. And I'm just saying, I can remember one of the people who impressed me very, very much as a boss and as a superior when I was working was for a large corporation, was this gentleman who would never make a decision until he listened to everybody in the room talk first. And that's somehow connected with what you were saying.
Yeah, Mike, it's funny, there's many characteristics of great leaders, but there's only one behavior that's common to all great leaders, only one. And that is that they spend a portion of every single day walking around, connecting, talking to, asking questions of the people around them. That's the only behavior. I mean, there's plenty of good storytellers, there's plenty of good smart minds, there's, some strategic thinkers, but the one behavior that's common to all great leaders is that they walk around every day and actually talk to and listen to the people around them. I think it's the greatest asset that we have as leaders is our ability to listen. And it goes to what you were saying, Gatik, that listening's magnetic, and sometimes ideas and futures are created in that act of listening. And what I mean by magnetic is that we're drawn to people that listen. People that listen well, we're drawn to them, and it allows our ideas or what we have in our head to actually form and be created and come to life. So it's the one behavior that is common to all great leaders. It's magnetic in that we're drawn to people, allows ideas to flourish. But I just think it's the one asset that we've got. It's how we, how we demonstrate that we value other people. Because if we're not listening to them, if we don't listen, we only listen to the people that we care about and that we value. If we don't care what they've got to say, we don't listen to them. So it's how we demonstrate that we value, our fellow human beings. So yeah, it's incredibly powerful.
So I'd add something to that, 30 odd years ago when I was at business school, I'm dating myself now, the one concept that came out was a concept, and I still talk about it today, which was MBWA, management by walking around. As simple as that sounds, and I've applied it in all my businesses. You know, I've listed companies on 2 stock exchanges. So both of those, my day is spent, I walk through the office and I talk to people and I sit down next to them and I say, tell me about what's your challenges. And, you know, midway through the day, we try and have lunch together. My team now is only 10 people. We try and have lunch together every day, which was interesting. So during the lockdowns of COVID, we talk about, you know, what are the characteristics of leadership and leadership behavior. And I absolutely agree with Dom. You know, it is about that communication. So every day during lockdown, and we're lucky in the West. Well, we were lucky, we're now locked in, but it's a whole different conversation we can have. That we've hardly had COVID in Western Australia. But during the lockdowns, I made sure that we had a Zoom meeting with my team for 10 minutes every day, cameras on. I didn't care if there was no makeup or you hadn't shaved, but I wanted to look in everyone's eyes and go, are you okay? You know, how are you doing working at home? And then when it came to the end of financial year, I thought, let's have drinks. So bring your own drinks, because we couldn't have drinks. And so I actually contacted one of the bottle shops and got bottles of gin and tonic delivered to every one of my team members' houses an hour before we were supposed to meet on Zoom. And it was about that communication. It was about the lack of physical shake hands, you know, see how the person's body language looks, to let's find a way to communicate that keeps people in contact, even though we're over a distance. And I think the pandemic has taught us nothing more than we actually have to learn how to communicate with people over a distance when we can't see their whole body. We can only see, you know, this bit on the screen.
Yeah, and if I could
just jump in there, Mike.
Go for it, Dom.
I was just going to say, management by walking around. Tom Peters, the organizational guru, Tom Peters, coined that phrase. I now call it leadership by walking around, because it goes to your point earlier, Rael, about one of your friends arguing with people. And I totally agree. People want to be in leadership positions. They don't actually want the responsibility of making those tough choices. So I call it leadership by walking around. And what you said, just very briefly, you said you asked them what their challenges are or what's happening for them. I think there's 3 things that those great conversations look like. And it's, you know, asking people, what are you doing? The second one is, what are the challenges? What are you having difficulties with? The third one is, and this is really important, how can I help you? You know, so what can I do to help? So they seem to be the 3 things that if you're going to practice management or leadership by walking around and connecting with people, you ask those 3 questions. Tom Peters would say that the only trick in great engagement is just to keep asking people, what do you think? What do you think? What are you thinking? What are you doing? What do you think about it? What do you think about what we're doing? Because as I said before, that validates our humanness. It demonstrates that you care about what they've got to say.
I agree, Dom. I think the other thing too is that you have to be real. If you're walking around and you're asking people, how can I make your job easier? And you never react or never change anything, you've lost credibility. So I think credibility and communication all go together. But Gaitik, I know you were trying to make a point earlier, so come on in here.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for remembering that. Yeah, just wanted to add to what we've been discussing, and I wanted to kind of circle back to your original question, Mike, on with what we've heard all of us share. And that's the question you asked, right? What does this mean? Where are we headed? What's happening in the corporates that we may be seeing? And because I mostly work with organizations and their leadership teams, I think the one trend that I see, and I really loved what you said, Ron, just there, and just reminds me of one of my most favorite books, The Inner Game of Tennis. And it seems like that's the kind of work that you've been doing. But that's really what it is, because to me, I think the last 2 odd years, the change, the shift that I've seen in a lot of organizations that I respect, a lot of the client organizations that I respect, the change that I've seen is that there's a lot more conversation around self. There's a lot more conversation around self. I think that's the first difference that I've seen. Yeah, organizations have been doing leadership programs, coaching, executive coaching, emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and we've been doing that for 15, 20 years now. But now I'm hearing a lot of authentic conversation around self, which is really great, because I reckon people are realizing, and that's really my first point, that it all begins with the self. And that's where organizations are beginning to focus. I don't want to call it self-awareness or mindfulness, because those are loaded terms today. But the idea that organizations are understanding that individuals and leaders need to fully, completely, authentically connect with their selves first before they can connect with others, that's been extremely refreshing. So I see that, number one, as a big trend. The second one that I see is going back to what I was talking about, storytelling and humanizing conversations and not being transactional. I guess the one thing that stops us is, again, the inner work, right? And I often find myself saying, and this is a quote that I put up, which says that the stories we tell ourselves often stop us from telling the stories we should. Right? And that goes back to the inner work. So as leaders, as professionals, when we're reaching out to people and connecting with them, or when we're having conversations, engaging with them, driving performance, hiring people, the way we speak is a reflection of what's going on inside and the stories that we're telling ourselves. And that's the work that is really important. And to me, that's really about slowing down to go fast and just connecting with your authentic being and being able to operate from there. Still early years, because this sounds like a lot of mambo jambo to a lot of people, a lot of organizations as well. And they're like, what are you talking about this, this deep, authentic connect, vulnerability, and yada, yada, yada. But I definitely see more real conversations around this. I do see a few organizations actually walking the talk, which is extremely refreshing and inspiring to see. So yeah, it's really about that self, Mike.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. It's interesting. Ron, did you have something you wanted to say? I saw you kind of looking like you were chomping at the bit there. Go ahead.
Well observed, Mike. You would probably be aware of Bushido negotiation, which is to the points that everybody else made. And that is, an American wants to do business with a Japanese company. So he makes an appointment, flies to Tokyo, arrives half an hour before the scheduled meeting. The receptionist welcomes him in and then says, Mr. So-and-so will be with you soon. So he's waiting for 2 hours. The Japanese businessman comes out, welcomes him into the boardroom, offers him tea, shows a genuine interest in his family, his activities, and the Americans thinking, I want to get on with the biz. And the Japanese businessman is smiling and asking questions and is genuinely interested. And after about an hour and a half of small talk, the Japanese businessman says, so what can I do for you? And the American's thinking, at last. So he just blurts out everything that he wants from the business relationship. And the Japanese businessman is smiling and nodding and taking everything in. And after he says, is there anything else? And the American says, no, I don't think so. That's about it. So then who has the power in the negotiation? who has the knowledge. So that's the value of asking questions.
Another story. Interesting.
Sorry to tread on your toes.
No. I just find it intriguing and interesting how things interweave. It's interesting. Rael, I wanted to come back to something that I mentioned to you at the end of your talk, and maybe take this little conversation in a bit of a different direction. But I couldn't help but think while you were presenting and explaining to us how the best way to connect with someone and communicate with them, and I understand that, and I think it's very interesting. But it also made me realize that it tells me if I'm a green or a red or a blue or a yellow or whatever, that those are the ways that other people can perhaps promote to me. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Knowing you and knowing your strengths, absolutely. Now, when I talk about colors, by the way, everybody has generally one or two dominant colors. It's not a singular dominant color. And in fact, in some of the detailed profiling tools, you actually get two different profiles. One is what we call your natural profile, one's your adapted profile. And adapted is how you adapt yourself at work, and natural is how you react at home or under stress. And so we also change our behavior based on those circumstances. And so understanding those things, I mean, I guess that we're going back to asking the right questions. And so the way I train people, and I run 2-day sales training workshops based around these concepts. But what we do is we teach people to ask the right questions. So if you've been to a realtor, a home open, as we call them in Australia, you walk in, and what is the first thing the real estate agent does? They start talking, and they tell the same story to every single person who walks through that door, right? Hi, Ron, and this is a fantastic 4-bedroom house. We're on so much land, and these are the... And I wanted to know, does it have views of the hills? Okay, that's all I was interested in. And so the average, and I use the realtors all the time because that's, a classic example. But so a simple thing of that, what the Japanese, the story of the Japanese businessman is exactly that. You slow it down, and we teach people to ask 4 questions. All right. And it's not really 4 questions. It's one question with 4 statements, and you ask people to almost self-identify. And so I'm meeting somebody for the first time, and we're talking, and they say, so, tell me a little bit more about your business, or tell me a little bit more about what you do. And so interestingly, Ron, you and if you guys have mentioned the idea of don't dive in, and Gatik, you said the same thing, you don't dive in with your what. Don't dive in with the what. So firstly, we talk about the what, the how, and the why. And I get people to write that down and then flip the page upside down. So they start with their why on the top. A little bit Simon Sinek-ish, but the idea behind that is you start with your why, because then you get people interested. But in terms of understanding colors, you talk to someone and you say, well, people do business with me or my company or our organization, whatever it is, for one of 4 reasons. Because we deliver great products with a great price. We actually build great teams, and we form a great team relationship with you. We really value the relationships that we have with you, and we have the best products and services, and we've got thousands of customer testimonials and details to share with you. And then comes the question, which of those 4 things makes the most sense to you? And if they say, oh, we want someone who'll deliver price on time, they're red. We know exactly how to deal with them. If they tell you they love long-term relationships with their suppliers, that's a green. If they say, oh, send me all the spreadsheets and the data, they're a blue. So that's how we work that into our conversations of asking questions, of sharing. and leading the conversation to get us to the answer so that we can communicate effectively with that person. I've stumped everyone now.
No, that's so interesting because in many years ago, I actually had an opportunity to learn a little bit about Scientology. And Scientology has an emotional tone scale. I'm not sure if you've ever heard about it, but they use that very similarly, where you match somebody's tone in order to communicate with them. And recognizing the tone that they're in is the key thing. Once you recognize somebody's tone, or recognize, as you're saying, their color, then you're able to communicate with them. You open up a door of natural communication that just happens.
Absolutely. And that's so the whole thing is, I mean, I talk about it more in the workshop tomorrow, but it's based around DISC, and everyone goes, oh, DISC, not that thing. But DISC has been around since 1929. And there are, millions of people who've used DISC, and it's not a detailed personality profile. Those exist too. But what it is, it's a fantastic mechanism for communicating with people and using it in an efficient way. And you want to be efficient. 11% of the world are red. The red, that means 89% are the other three colors. Only reds like being sold to. The hard sell, knock on the door, vacuum cleaner salesman. He only succeeds 1 in 10 times. Why? Because he only manages to sell to the reds. They're only 11% of the population. The other 89% of the world, you have to sell to by not selling. You have to create an environment that makes it easy for them to buy. And again, when I talk about buy and sell, that's not commercial transactions. That is just ideas. You're in a board meeting, you're trying to convince people to go a particular way. It's the same. You're selling. When you meet a partner for the first time, you are selling, okay? You hope they're not selling to you, because that's a whole different conversation. But you are selling. You're selling yourself. You're selling who you are. That's what this communication's about.
It's so funny that you say that, because I tell my students frequently, that, and I teach engineering, so I tell my students frequently that they need to be salespeople, and they look at me like I've got a square head and I'm upside down. And I say, guess what? You want a girlfriend? You want a boyfriend? You better start selling, because that's exactly what we do all the time. And people don't realize it. And we spend tons of money, tons of time, tons of energy learning all these other skills, and the basic skills of communication seem to be, slipping through. That's why I'm so excited and so refreshed to hear each one of you, who are meeting with very important and high level management people, and you're telling them the main thing is connect with people, connect with people. So I think this is wonderful.
Can I jump in, Mike?
Sure.
Just picking up on Rael, your point, and Ron, actually everyone's point so far. And one of the fundamental gaps to what you were just saying, Mike, is that we actually have lost that ability to connect because we don't ask good questions at all. In fact, we don't ask questions very much at all. There's a great piece of research that doctors interrupt their patients after 11 seconds on average. And I use that fact to say to our clients, how can you possibly understand what's important to the other person if you're interrupting after 11 seconds, or even let's double it, 22 seconds? It doesn't allow you to understand the other person. And I think the mistake we make is that most people think that their path to convince someone of something is to be interesting. And what we always say is your path to actually connecting and engaging with someone is to be interested in them. Don't try and be interesting, try and be interested in them, which means that you ask them lots of questions and you uncover what's important to them. And I think it's a real lost art, how you actually show genuine curiosity, because no matter who you're talking to, that's our rule of thumb. there's going to be at least one thing that that person knows that you don't know. And our challenge is to find out what that is. And that requires just extraordinary curiosity, fierce curiosity, as we talk about. I think it's a lost art. People think that they have to be the smartest person in the room and don't realize that we actually engage people by letting them shine, by, you know, bringing out their best and finding out about them and what their contribution can be. And all the evidence says that's how you actually develop a really high performance culture. And I think that's what we need and what's missing at the moment.
I really wish I could remember. I know there's some research that was done that was showing that people who listened and people who, you know, as we've all been taking, the person who talks a lot and the person who listens well, and the person who listens well was considered by some kind of random sampling to be a better conversationalist. I thought that was pretty interesting.
There's a stack of research. I'm sure all the other panelists know it, but the metrics are extraordinary in terms of sales results of people who listen at least 70% of the time. It's something like 7 times better results than the people that talk 70% of the time, you know? So yeah, there's real metrics around this, and it's because it's that ability to connect and understand what the needs are of the other person.
Yeah,
which then allows you to sell to them, of course, much more easily.
Somebody else was trying to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in there. I just wanted to acknowledge you, Dom, because I think you said it beautifully, and it's a good reminder for me as well, because that's really what it's all kind of also boiling down to. Because if anybody here watching this video and this conversation is thinking about, so what do I need to do differently and where do I start from? I think a great starting point is exactly what you said, Dom. Can we begin to demonstrate genuine interest in others? That sense of curiosity in conversations and connections, and it resonates. Sure, we talk about it, but you know, sometimes when you're listening to others, it just connects the dots for you. And that's what happened to me, because, you know, I've got 2 beautiful daughters. My elder one is 16, my younger one is 10, and very different. My elder one is quiet and a little bit of an introvert, and I love her to death for the beautiful person she is. And my younger one is completely the opposite, just the way each one of us are. And I'm being a parent, trying to encourage conversations between the 2 sisters, right? 10 and 16 isn't really very close together. And when I see Keisha, my elder daughter, speaking with Kyra, you know, there are moments they sit on the sofa and they have this conversation. So how was your day at school? And that's when I'm really pushing them to have this conversation, right? And then their replies are in monosyllables, right? Good. So what did you do today? Nothing. You know what I'm saying? So what do you want to do now? Whatever. And that's when I kind of, and I'm a coach, and that's a pain as a parent sometimes, because you tend to overcoach your kids, at least for me. And you know, I found myself telling Keisha exactly this, Dom, which is, you know, if you want to connect with your sister, you've got to show genuine interest in her and her things and her interests. Because she came to me once, Keisha, and said that, you know, how do I talk to Kyra? Because, you know, we don't talk about the same stuff, but I do want to connect with her. I said, you've got to start by showing genuine interest in her stuff. So talk to her, ask her about this video game that she's playing called Minecraft, and ask her what it's all about. You know, let her explain it to you, and, you know, show genuine interest. And I think that's a real powerful thing. So yeah, just wanted to kind of add to that.
Can I ask a question, Mike?
Sure.
Ron, just in the work you do with people, I'm curious where you'd start with someone. Like you said, come and spend a couple of hours with me to that bike rider. I mean, is that typical for you, that it's one session of a few hours and you can literally transform their lives? Is that typical? Is that the starting point? Where do you start, Ron?
Well, Dom, I don't transform lives. I facilitate processes in which they transform themselves, and I mean that. Yeah, back on the selling thing. I had a quick lunch with the senior sales director of one of the world's largest corporations, and she said, "So, what's the difference between your sales training, and everyone else's?" And I said, "Well, you know how it started off with the 5 or the 6 stages of the sale back in the day, and then it became relationship selling, then it became collaborative selling. Well, what I do is effortless energy selling. That's the title of my sales training." And she said, "Well, okay, so what's the difference? What's the differentiator?" And I said, "Well, with mine, you don't have to close." And she said, "Selling without closing." Well, you can if you want to, but you don't have to. And we'd talk. And she said, "So," I said, "Do you have any other questions?" And she said, "No, I don't think so." I said, "Well, it was very nice meeting you. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Goodbye." So the next day she called and she said, "Are you doing anything next Monday?" And I said, "Well, I do, but I can rearrange things. What do you have in mind?" And she said, "Well, I'm running a training day for my senior sales team, and I'd like you to run it." Yeah, sure. So we worked it all out. And at the end of the training, I said to her, "You remember our lunch?" She said, "Yeah, it was a week ago." And I said, "Do you remember what I didn't do?" And she said, "You didn't close me." And I said, "Yeah, the next day you called, and the next week I'm actually here." And the thing is, what the basis of the whole thing is, you show people their own greatness. So that's what I meant when I don't transform lives. They transform themselves. Just one quick one. I got a call from the Victorian state manager of one of the big banks. He ran the personal banking division. And he said, "I saw you do a presentation. I was there when you did a 1-hour presentation in front of senior staff. I want you to come down to Melbourne and train a whole lot of other people for a day, because that stuff you did in the hour, I've adopted as part of our corporate culture." And I said, "So how have you gone?" And he said, "Well, in the last 6 months, all of my divisions have been running it between 125 and 200% above their targets." I said, "Your targets were too low." He said, our targets are 125% of last year's revenue." I said, "So some of your people are on track to do 375% of what they did last year?" He said, "Yeah, that's why I want you to come down and do a proper training session." And I said, "2 things, Shane. Would you mind putting that in writing on your letterhead, please?" And he was kind enough to do that. And he said, "What's the other thing?" And I said, "Well, I like you. I like the bank. For this next one, there'll be no fee." And he said, "What's the catch?" And I said, "Instead of a fee, all I'd like is 0.01% of growth over the next 12 months, not revenue, just the growth." And he said, "We'll give you the fee." So it's all about facilitating situations where people view themselves differently, and they're looking in the same direction as teams, and they raise their levels of expectation, both as individuals and in a team environment. So that's what I facilitate. And that's what happens with sports people. All the sports people, they came from the corporate presentations.
It's interesting that you say that, because as you were talking there, I was thinking of some of the sports teams that I'm familiar with, and how the ones that set themselves apart are doing exactly that. They see themselves as bigger than they are today. And unless they have that vision, it never happens. Interesting. So very interesting. Anybody else have any last comments we want to make before we close down the panel? Any thoughts?
I do, Mike.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I was feeling a little bit of conflict when people were talking about the self, because of my comments before that the self's a poor place from which to find any meaning. But that's not what it wasn't an insular thing that you were talking about, Gadik. And so I wanted to make just a point that I think the most useful thing that we can do for our own well-being at the moment is to and I'm sure everyone here does it, but it's what I talk to our clients about, is to articulate your own values and then ensure that you do what I said before, which is values congruent behavior. If you want people to trust you, if you want people to work hard for you and be engaged, they have to see that you are living out your values, that you behave in accordance with your values. Otherwise, they just won't trust you. They mightn't be able to articulate that, but they'll think something's dodgy here. In that, there's just some wonderful research out of the School of Positive Psychology, which says that anxiety and gratitude can't exist in the human brain at the same time. So anxiety and gratitude can't exist concurrently. So we translate that into find a purpose that serves others. And in doing that, you actually can't experience anxiety whilst you're serving others. So it's a shift in that focus from self to others. So I just wanted to finish with that. I understand the importance of understanding self in terms of articulating your own values. It's one of the most powerful things that we can do, and then live those values. But then in terms of that purpose, it has to be outside of the self. And that seems to be the pathway to, to real transformation in the people around you that you care about.
That's so true. I mean, we have an expression that says walk your talk. I think that's pretty much what you're saying.
It is, Mike. Yeah.
And people see through you if you're not honest. So, it's hard to argue with what you're saying, but at the same time, it's not always so apparent, or it's not always there when you wish it was there. Let's put it that way.
Just a little bit on what you just said. It's not so important that people even share your values. It's more important that they see that you're being true to your own values. That, in terms of leadership, it's much more important that you're consistent with your own values rather than try and make them someone else's that are more palatable to the people around you. So it's really important that you're true to yourself. And I think that's where the conversation's been going today.
So true. I can remember when I was young, which was many years ago, we had a couple of really good politicians. I'm living in Canada, so I apologize for the earlier mistake when I said evening and you guys are all experiencing morning, but I'm about 17 hours behind you guys. So none of this has actually happened for me yet. It's still Thursday.
It's a good day ahead, Mike. I can tell you that.
Mike, I've got to say that Canada's looking particularly tropical at this time of year.
Well, I like to create my own reality, I believe that whatever I believe is what's going to happen. So it works out so far. But it's been number one, I want to thank every one of you individually. It's been a really interesting discussion. It's funny how coming from completely different sort of angles, from storytelling to whatever, we all come with the same sort of conclusion, which is, if you don't talk to the heart, you're not going to get through. So any last words before we finalize everything for everybody?
Yeah, just to say thanks, Mike, and a quick, I'll just wave from that side of the room so we can say hello and goodbye, and thanks for facilitating everything. And that's been a lot of fun.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you,
Real. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.